Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I am Elizabeth Goldstein, the president of MAS, and I really appreciate your joining us. This is the final program in a larger MASterworks series, reimagined from our typical awards ceremony to offer deeper ways for the public to engage and connect with the design community. Established in 2001, the MASterworks Awards recognizes design excellence in the built environment of New York. This year's awards would not have been possible without the following jury members who dedicated their time and expertise to selecting the 2021 honorees. Justin Davidson of New York Magazine, Lisa Switkin of James Corner Field Operations, Weston Walker from Studio Gang, Vicki Weiner from the Pratt Institute, and Calvin Sau, principal of Sau McCowan Architects, who also serves on the MAS Board of Directors. We want to congratulate the team for LaGuardia Terminal B Arrivals and Departures Hall, which won Best New Infrastructure, an award recognizing the distinctive design in public service projects. You all just were able to see some of the imagery from Terminal B on your screen as the program started, and you'll view more shortly. On behalf of the MASterworks jury, Weston Walker commented on the project by saying that Terminal B is a truly transformative project for New York, a wonderful and much needed addition to the city's transportation infrastructure. The designers have carefully considered the user experience at every scale, from the overall space planning down to details and finishes. Wayfinding is intuitive, services are easy to access, and travelers flow pleasantly through lofty and light-filled spaces. Perhaps most impressively, the facility has been intricately woven through existing airport infrastructure and operations, which is an incredible feat in and of itself. LaGuardia Gateway Partners was selected by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey to redevelop LaGuardia Terminal B in 2016. In addition to the redevelopment, LaGuardia Gateway Partners has a 35-year lease with the Port Authority to manage the terminal. The LaGuardia Terminal B project, valued at $5.1 billion, including about $4 billion in construction value, is the largest public-private partnership in US aviation history. The new Terminal B has been opening in phases to allow the original terminal to continue to operate during construction. As of today, the new terminal is 90% open and construction remains on time and on budget. If you're flying next week on American, Air Canada, United, Southwest, and JetBlue, you'll have the treat of experiencing Terminal B firsthand. This award and topic also could not be more timely, with investment in infrastructure projects front and center due to President Biden's recently passed $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill. We hope for more good news for New York City, with recent headlines sharing as much as $685 million being perhaps available for regional airports, for example. And now, to introduce our panel, for today's discussion, we are joined by an all-star team. Stewart Steeves is the Chief Operating Officer of Vantage Airport Group and former CEO of LaGuardia Gateway Partners. Vantage is an airport management, development, and investment company who has also been leading the new JFK Terminal 6 project. He has been involved with Terminal B project from the very beginning. In fact, he led the actual bid application process. He has previously led Vantage redevelopment of Nassau Airport in the Bahamas. Welcome. Derek Thielmann is the project director, also from LaGuardia Gateway Partners, and Derek is leading the design and construction of Terminal B. He has previously led airport construction projects in both Nassau and Vancouver, Canada. Paul Auguste is the Director of Transportation and Aviation for HOK. He is the design manager for Terminal B project and also has led projects at Dulles Airports and JFK. Nicholas Baume is the Artistic and Executive Director of the Public Art Fund. He collaborated with LGP to commission the artwork for the new terminal. A native of Australia, his curatorial career began with Caldor Public Art Project, and later the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney. He was the contemporary curator at the Wadsworth Museum in Hartford, Connecticut, before moving to Boston to join the Institute of Contemporary Art as chief curator. He has been making New York City the public art world a better place since 2009. Welcome to all of you. We're thrilled to have you, and we'll start the program, I think, first with you, Stewart, if you would, to share a bit more background than I did on the project overview and process.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. So this project has been in the works for many years. I think we're going to have a presentation start here. And LaGuardia Gateway Partners that Elizabeth referred to is a consortium made up of a series of partners, Skanska, Vantage, Meridium, and JLC on the equity side, Vantage for development, management, and operations. And then our construction partners were Skanska Walsh, and our design partners were HOK and WSP. We're thrilled to have Paul joining us today, who's been an integral part of this project for many years. This was a really unique challenge when it was introduced to, I guess, the industry by the Port Authority, and when we elected to pursue it. And we came up with a really unique solution. But the challenge itself was to deal with reconstructing LaGuardia on its existing footprint, which is incredibly small for an airport of the passenger throughput that it has, and a facility that was serving almost 16 million passengers a year prior to COVID that was only designed for 8 million passengers a year. And so we undertook this project that if you put it in a kind of a Manhattan context, if you will, it's about 1.3 million square feet, but that doesn't really give credit to the volume of the building. If you think of this on a volume basis, this building is equivalent to about 120-story skyscraper in Manhattan. But then in addition to that, we built a 3,600 spot parking garage. We built 8 miles of new roadways, including 20 elevated structures, and 2 miles of new aircraft maneuvering area. And we did all of this while serving about 50,000 passengers a day, somewhere in the order of 25 to 30,000 vehicles a day, and about 1,000 aircraft movements per day. So we had to preserve the integrity of that intense operating environment while building a facility of a massive scale on a really compressed footprint. And so that really led to some unique thinking around design solution, both from a macro planning perspective, but then also for us, very importantly, how we would make the experience for the users, both the airlines and the passengers, really, really impressive. So for an airline, that means operating resiliency and efficiency. And for a passenger, it means efficiency as well, but also a memorable and attractive experience. In fact, we wanted to make LaGuardia a place that would really resonate with the users, and where LaGuardia might have been an airport to avoid in the past, we wanted to actually make it an airport that becomes its own, a destination in its own right, where people would actually choose and elect to spend time at LaGuardia and take advantage of the services and the amenities and the offerings. So that was really the challenge in front of us. And I'll pass it over to Paul to really describe a little bit about how we undertook this challenge through the bid phase, to lay out a project plan here to bring it to life, really. So Paul.
Perfect. Okay, thank you, Stewart. I appreciate that. I would just like to say to start off, I've been fortunate in my 27-year career to work with two great groups. I worked with Schiphol in the late 90s and learned a lot from the Dutch group about designing JFK Terminal 4. And I'm very fortunate to work side by side with Derek and Stewart for the last 6 years in Vantage and LGP to make this dream come true. So what I wanted to show you is, if you look at this image, this is the old CTB, Central Terminal building. And if you notice right off the bat, the area in red, the crescent-shaped building, is directly in the middle of the site. There's a large parking garage on the land side, and then there's some very skinny, tiny fingers that are piers on the air side. And what frustrates everybody about LaGuardia was the decrepit 1964 old building and the inefficiencies on the taxiway and getting out to your runway. So it would have been very easy if we would have designed our terminal and taken down this one in its entirety, but we had to maintain the operations. So what you can see in the blue are the roadways, the departures and arrivals roadways that had to be maintained as we did this. And the first thing we did was relocate that parking garage on the other side of the aircraft tower, air traffic control tower. And so we used that footprint to build our new head house. If you remember, if you think about head houses, typically airports have a grand gesture for a head house with a swooping roof, and then they have a very small baggage claim area. We didn't do that here. We went and we looked at the site and we said, how can we improve this? And I want to show you the new terminal design with the old crescent shape in between. And what we did to reduce the schedule and reduce the construction cost, we built this head house, which is an ode to an iconic building like Grand Central Station. The head house houses the departures and arrivals facilities. We created these long pedestrian bridges to go right over the construction and facilitate the construction schedule into these island concourses. So we were able to do this and build the new terminal while operating the old one. And that was a circulation of the rows that you saw. How did this really come about? The Port Authority had given us the drawing in blue, which was their indicative design. It was a typical pier shaped concourse. There were inefficiencies in the corners because you can't park aircraft there, and there were separate security screening checkpoints on the outsides. And I'll show you where we went with this. When we looked at this, we said it could be built, but we really went to think outside the box, and we said, how can we address the site and all of these sort of inefficiencies? I want to play a short video just to show you how this evolved from the indicative design, pushing the head house further to the south, getting it as close to the Grand Central so we could maximize the airside. Maximizing the airside, introducing taxiways so that any aircraft can leave from its position, from its contact gate, and have multiple directions to get to the taxi lanes and runways. So what this is doing is making a very, very efficient airside, allowing the aircraft movement to happen much easier. It facilitated the construction, and it created this sculptural iconic terminal. When we look inside the building, as I mentioned, we relocated the 2 security screening checkpoints into a centralized flexible space. We pushed the head house forward and maximized the site, allowed for the movement around the airside. Hopefully you can see my mouse going around. And then shifted the entire building over after we relocated the parking garage that Stewart mentioned to really maximize the site. And then there were 2 options to get to the concourse. One would be underground, given our water table is 7 feet. That wasn't really feasible. So we went with the pedestrian bridges that went right over the construction and facilitated this new design. When you look at these new pedestrian bridges, my favorite place in the building, we actually have aircraft, group 3, potentially group 4 aircraft that can fit underneath. It's about 60 feet up in the air, 450 feet long. And this is really what facilitated the design and construction. If you look at the construction phasing, we started with the Island Concourse B, which is the East Concourse that opened in late 2018. The head house was pushed to the front. You can see the existing CTB, and you can see in this particular case, the Western Concourse is partially open, and the 2 piers for C and D are currently online. And when you look at the scale, you can see the scale of the concourses were 8-foot tall, squat little piers that were designed for propeller aircraft in the 60s. And you can see how generous the size is. These are basically about 65 feet wide, and our concourse is about 124 feet wide. So much more generous. As you can see, this sort of timeline of the finished product, the green was operational in 18, Concourse A, the Western Concourse, and pedestrian bridge are currently under construction. Should come online about December of this year. The head house is now operational. I think we're 80% operational, 80% complete in construction. And what you see here in blue is our central heating and refrigeration plant. Completely, all of our critical infrastructure is built here to facilitate the power and needs of the terminal. And what you see above it is what we call Central Hall West. The idea of this Central Hall is to eventually link Terminal C and B together so that we have one unified airport. If you think about it, This is the first airport that's completely done a redesign in the last 40 years in the country. And so this is remarkable that we're able to do this. Delta Terminal C, that's a separate presentation that's happening to the left over here. So you see the finished product. I wanted to show you a little bit of the construction, two construction photos, because what you can really appreciate here is the Grand Central Parkway here on the right side of the screen, and how much we pushed all of the terminal to the south to get right up and use every square inch of that footprint. Very small laydown area. What you see here are the departures roadways and the terminal. You can imagine how difficult that is to construct while maintaining the operations. You can start to see the roadways of the existing and the new roadways coming into play. And this is one of my favorite photos, because this is showing you the existing central terminal behind you, partially demoed, the departures roadway above, the arrivals roadway below, and our new pedestrian bridge. And that was really the key to kicking off that design. Stewart, did I miss anything that you want to jump in, or Derek?
I think you're hitting it, Paul.
Okay.
Yeah, I got a few points. I got a few points I could add.
Sure,
In
go
there.
ahead. Go ahead.
Paul, if you
Yeah, I would like.
Because we want it to be. Yeah, go ahead.
if you go back to slide 8, Paul.
Mm-hmm. The video.
Oh, sorry. Well, don't run the video, but I think this is a good talking point slide. I think what's kind of, or what might be important to point out, when we first contemplated bidding on the project and we looked at the port's reference design, there were a number of challenges which we saw, and Paul pointed some of these out. The 2 security checkpoints, a lot of inside corners. Inside corners are very inefficient for aircraft gating and layout. And to the right of the slide, the lower right, you see a very long, slender, single-loaded pier.
Sorry. This guy.
Paul's pointing out. And if you look at the building in its mass, there's a lot of surface area to this building, just not only from a roofing perspective, but curtain wall, building materials perspective. And even though they brought the building forward closer to the Grand Central Parkway, and they've created some more airside real estate, the real estate really isn't usable by the entire airport facility. It's really just, it adds benefit to the users of Terminal B, but doesn't necessarily improve the flow of aircraft across the facility.
Right.
The other challenge we had, you can see here in this picture, the head house actually sits on top of the main arterial road into the airport. And we looked at the port's phasing plans. I don't remember the exact number. I think there were 9 or 10 major phases, but maybe 15 or 16 in totality, with a pretty long schedule. And we really struggled with how we were going to build this efficiently and maintain the operation and really sustain an intuitive passenger journey throughout construction. So it didn't take us long to sort of embark down our own path and look at alternatives to this design. And maybe if you go to slide 13, Paul. I think what you can see here in the finished design is we went much more vertical with the building. So our head house is 4 stories. The overall surface area of the facility with the head house and the concourses and the bridges is much less than what the port's reference design was. So we're basically achieving the same program in less space, which meant a more sustainable design, less building materials. In fact, I think we're the first airport to receive, and I thank Paul and the HOK team for this, achieving a LEED Gold standard for an airport. And I think what really also helped with this design by shrinking our footprint on the site and meeting all the program objectives is we reduced the phasing down to 5 key phases, which had minimal impact on the existing operation, were easy transition points for our operations and facilities staff. And it drove down our cost and it drove down our schedule by about a year from the port's reference design. And it was really a recipe for the winning bid.
Well,
Yeah, exactly.
I'd love to ask you all a follow-up question, because it seems to me that this process of having all of the the parties that you described, Stewart, really sort of at the table, it sounds like from the beginning, led to a very collaborative, iterative process that yielded a lot of problem solving. And you've described that very effectively, I think, to date. But I'm interested in hearing more about that collaboration and how it worked. And was the Port Authority at the table or not? And I'm just curious about how that all came together and worked.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely a collaborative process. And in fact, during the competitive procurement process with the Port Authority, they had an opportunity to submit refinements. And I think that's how it was originally characterized, as refinements to their design. And if they accepted the refinement, then we could incorporate it into our bid and still be a compliant bid. And so after a few weeks into the process in our engagement with the Port Authority, we kind of said, are they open-minded to a grand refinement where we actually reconceived some of the master planning? And they were, to their credit, they were. And so that led to a conversation over a number of months. And I have to say the process was very iterative. It wasn't, it wasn't just an exercise of handing off a design to the architects. Then that design went to the builders to cost out, and then went over to the finance team to finance. In fact, everybody worked hand in hand in an iterative way, with our partners, that being the Port Authority primarily, around a plan that could work for all interests, that could work from an operating perspective, could work from constructability perspective, could achieve our goal of being a fantastic and customer-friendly facility, and also importantly, working from a financing perspective. At the end of the day, this is a P3, it's a public-private partnership. So we had $3 billion, almost $3 billion of private investment into the facility. Those investors have to earn a yield and a return on their investment. And so it was very important that we did this in an economical and a risk managed way. And I think the iterative process really yielded an optimal outcome on all aspects, from an experiential perspective, a planning perspective, a construction efficiency perspective, an operating perspective, and a financeability perspective. And I think, through that engagement, I think we all realized, and the Port Authority as well, that this was a path that was worth continuing to explore. And I have to say, we haven't had through, knock on wood, because we're not quite done, but through the entire course of construction, we haven't had any interruption on aeronautical activity as a consequence of the construction program. And that's pretty remarkable when you consider the congestion, certainly pre-COVID, of LaGuardia and the intensity of activity at LaGuardia Airport, and just the pure scale and magnitude of the construction activity.
Absolutely. I think that the collaboration sounds very interesting and very productive for those of us who are ultimately the users, to create an amazingly efficient both construction process, but also end product. So I wanted to turn you all, if I might, a little bit. You've touched on sustainability, which is clearly a very important thing that New York City more broadly and the nation and the world needs to be thinking about. You've talked a little bit about that, but I wanted to turn a little bit, if I might, to the more experiential things that you chose to do with the airport. And if I may say, I think airports are a pretty boring experience by and large. As our time in them has increased because security concerns have increased, we spend a lot more time in airports than perhaps we would choose to under other circumstances. But you've all obviously thought about what people might enjoy. And I'd love to hear more from the entire team about how you decided on those things first. How did how did you decide to add those to the project? And then a little more detail on the aspects of the individual aspects of them. That would be great.
I'll start it off from a philosophical, and then kick it over to the rest of the team here. Yeah. I think very important for us is the success of an airport from a passenger perspective is measured by passenger satisfaction. And the idea is that if a passenger chooses an activity on their way and their journey through the airport, if they choose a service, or they choose an amenity, they choose something to do, they make a personal choice, then they're probably satisfied because they actually chose something they preferred. They didn't just go to the hold room and sit there waiting for their flight. So it's really about how can we create an experience that impacts people, leaves an impression, and creates personal choice that is meaningful to people. And with all due respect to Paul and the architecture team, there's building forms and massing and things of that nature, and we show them in photos like we do right now. But most people experience the airport from the back door of a taxi going in the front door. They don't experience it from the other side of the highway, taking a dusk shot. So how do we, achieve a successful architectural outcome, but how do we succeed in the experience with the things that people interact with and touch and feel in the course of their journey? Because that is so impactful to the passengers. And that's everything from restrooms to concessions to check-in kiosks and all the little details. And they're just extremely important. So I'll pass over to Derek and Paul to add a bit more color on that. But that's really philosophically, right from the very beginning, we knew that mattered.
Maybe I'll jump in here, Paul.
Sure.
Maybe an interesting point to raise is in the RFP process that we went through with the Port Authority, there actually wasn't any requirement for art or sense of place or those sorts of elements. We actually made the decision as part of our bid and our team to incorporate that into the design. And some of that just was from our Vantage's corporate philosophy that it was important to introduce elements of sense of place into the airport facility, really making the airport feel like it belongs to the community or to the city or the town or the country that it represents. I think from a planning perspective, very early on, while we didn't know what the art would be, we knew we were going to incorporate art and certain feature zones in the building. One in particular, and we designed the building intentionally around that. So in the check-in hall, we, right from the bid days, we designed the roof to handle a point load of 5 tons where the CRSA piece is positioned. There's an opening in the floor there intentionally to allow that art to suspend through 2 levels. The back wall, the feature wall where the Laura Owens piece is, we didn't know what was going to go on there, but we knew it was a prominent wall and there was an opportunity there for art or some sort of feature. And the other area was up on level 4 in our retail commercial zone. I call it a feature zone because really what we want to do is get people to gravitate and dwell and relax there after they've gone through security. And art is a good way to hold people there. In the end, we actually put something else there. We put a water feature there. We didn't put some static art, although we did put some. Jeppe Hein's work is up in this area and complements the water feature nicely.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Derek.
I was just going to add, our idea of sense of place is really it's about familiarity. It's not really about putting a big Statue of Liberty in the building or a big red apple. It's really about a building with clean lines where we introduce things like materials, finishes, products and offerings that the public or the passenger can resonate with or connect with on a local level. In many respects, I would say it's subliminal. It's not obvious. If you look for it and somebody points it out, you might say, "Oh yeah, I do recognize that." But it's really just about familiarity. And I think when things are familiar to people, they tend to relax a bit more and the journey is a bit more enjoyable. And maybe I'll let Paul talk about some of the finishes and offerings we did in and around the terminal.
Actually, Paul, if you can hang on for a second, I was actually gonna, since we've been looking at the art, I wanted to ask Nicholas to jump in and talk a little bit about how you responded just from the collaborative perspective to the opportunities that were presented to the Public Art Fund for the art pieces. And then I'll come back to you, Paul.
Sure.
Well, it was a really exciting opportunity, I think, primarily because it's so unusual for contemporary art to be seen as such an integral part of not simply sort of the decoration of a space, but for it to really be integrated into the architectural experience. And knowing that this was, one of New York City's primary airports, that artists would also be excited at that opportunity. And so I think there were, it was an exciting idea. It was an opportunity to elevate the kind of experience that you were talking about, Elizabeth, and that, Stewart and Derek have very much kind of seen as critical to the Vantage ethos of creating airports. And I think we took it to, an even greater level. And I think, it's a credit to the boldness of the vision that they brought to doing this. And so I think the artists the works they've created are incredibly inventive and dazzling, and also thematically incredibly appropriate to creating that sense of place. So, all of those things were, in a sense, that table was laid. And of course, it would have been great to be involved, even earlier in that process, but I think the thinking that had gone into a commitment to art was really unprecedented.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, I just want to give you a flavor for the design. So, the verticality, Derek mentioned that we're 4 stories. We introduced an HOV level for group check-in at the first floor, then arrivals and departures. Most people are usually used to 2 levels. The verticality of the building and the grand scale echo New York City, the transparency and the fluid design kind of celebrate the movement through the space. What you're looking at in the foreground is sort of an island. You can see the curtain wall that goes down all the way to the first floor on the left side. You can see the light coming in from the other side from a clear story window. The floor plates are thought of as islands, and we're introducing light through the space to get down into the belly. So like I said, most terminals celebrate departures, and then you come in and you sneak in like a rat in the small bag claim. We're introducing light, we're introducing curtain wall, we're giving it a much bigger volume. We're creating openings in the floor for artwork. And what you see in the background are the ticket counters, which are parallel to the path of travel. So what we didn't want to do is have passengers rely on wayfinding signage to go through the space. It's more intuitive, and you have a sense of direction. We're maximizing the use of the ticket counter kiosks. We're generous in our space and our electronic kiosks that we were able to open up in a pandemic without any issues in terms of social distancing. But what you can see is from the front door, as Stewart mentioned, you come in from the left and move to the right. A lot of passengers aren't even checking in anymore. They already have their boarding pass and they have their bag and they're going to carry on. And what you see on the right is a very clear portal, 150-foot opening. Everybody knows where they're going. It's not, do I go to that checkpoint or that checkpoint? And that was one of the key features, right? So what we wanted to do is stop the barriers, make it a very intuitive flow, come through, go through security, lots of light. I don't have security photos, but security is the only wall that you will see in this terminal, and that's because it has to be locked. But latest technology, common use facility, very generous recomposure area after the checkpoint, and a large portal. So basically a window out to the airside. So you always know what direction you're going. You have a sense of the timing of where your gate is, and you have complete visibility of the airfield. From that point, everybody goes upstairs and enters the retail hall, which you can see here. There's only one decision point in the terminal, and that's whether I go to the East Concourse or the West Concourse. That's it. Otherwise, it's fluid, and everybody understands where they're going. In terms of sense of place, we talked a little bit about it. The materiality and the finishes of the design are reminiscent of different locations in the city. So when you look at sort of the base building design, the precast, the metals, the glass, these are found in different boroughs, maybe in Soho, maybe in Fifth Avenue. You find all the different elements that reminiscent of New York, not just New York City, but New York. And so going through the head house, you're going to be met with an incredible variety of retailers, food and beverage, local companies that really express what it means to be a New Yorker. You come through, and this is the direction one towards the concourse, the Eastern concourse, but the ultimate exit. So I think Derek was the one to mention it. There's sort of a one single point of exit. Everybody comes out, and you come out at this level. So in most terminals I mentioned, you have a grand gestures of departures, and you sneak in arrivals. We experience that grand space both in departing and arriving passengers, and we slip down through this light well down to bag claim. I think I have a bag claim shop, but maybe I don't. No, I don't. But these are the pedestrian bridges, and you can see how small that aircraft is underneath us. There's a Southwest jet flying right underneath us. My favorite place to be in the terminal. I want everybody to go experience that. I will stop at the concourse. The concourse went from these little squat 8-foot ceilings that are leaking to this grand 60-foot high ceiling that has the clubs and lounges up above and all the hold rooms and amenities down below. It's really meant to feel like hospitality. You have a lot of amenities in terms of parks, children's play areas. And again, you see sort of the stone and the finishes from upstate New York. The flooring also gives you a sense of direction. The entire experience for the customer and everything they can touch at the 8-foot level really makes them welcome them as a tourist into New York, and makes people come back and reminiscent that they are a New Yorker. I'll leave it at that. So I don't take
I will not let you go by, Paul, the entire team, without asking why you decided to include a park.
The park is again, it's local species native to New York. One of the amenities, and maybe Derek and Stewart can touch on this, one of the amenities that LGP felt very strong about was having a tranquil place, some place that people can relax, can congregate, and more importantly, in the background here, you can see a children's play area. You don't see that in a lot of airports. It's an interactive wall behind it. The kids love it. It's a very safe place, and it tires out, I should say, some of the kids, and the parents are very much enjoying this.
And I think I should just point out, those aren't native species in this picture. These were some temporary trees, then we replaced
Sure.
the more native ones later. But I think it's all part of choice again, because along the journey, as Paul described the journey just then, you notice you don't go through security and then hit a hold room. You go through security and hit amenities and artwork and features and water features and casual places to sit on bridges where aircraft go beneath. And then you come to this park area. So all these are personal choices where people can spend time and dwell. And what that has the advantage of doing is twofold. One is it distributes people throughout the building to things they prefer to do. So if you go to the hold room, the few people that default to the hold room, there will be fewer people in the hold room because they're distributed throughout the facility. So it's a more efficient and total use of the facility, which just elevates the level of service for everybody, whether you've made a personal choice to do something else or whether you've gone to the hold room, but now there's less people there with you because others have made a personal choice. So it just improves the level of service for everybody in the facility. And I think that's a key part of the design. And I think, another aspect of this we haven't talked about yet is not in the visual. It's in, things like natural light and acoustics and things of that nature. And we really tried hard to make the facility as quiet as possible. So we've used soft flooring in different places. We've been very careful about announcements, how TVs or music is introduced to the space, and then even from an operating perspective, use of radios, things of that nature to make it quiet. So that if you want to go and have a more engaging, active environment or louder environment, you can go to a restaurant or a bar for that. But if you want a quiet place to rest, because, you can find that too. And it makes it very soothing and relaxing, in the evenings, and especially or all day. But in the evening when the light comes down and we let the light levels come down, it feels like a living room. And in fact, there's even lamps designed into the hold rooms to make the hold rooms feel more like a living room space. And it all just improves it improves the relaxation of the passengers. And we like to say a relaxed passenger is a satisfied passenger. And the other thing we haven't commented on is we talk about passengers a lot. Passengers spent maybe 2-3 hours in the airport when they used it, but employees work in here all day. And so whatever anybody thought as a passenger of the old LaGuardia, imagine the thousands of people who work there. So by creating this far improved environment, including the natural light and the acoustics we just talked about, it makes the employee environment far, far more attractive. And then those employees are far better positioned to be engaging and helpful and provide amazing customer service. And so that's been a big part of this exercise as well.
I wanted to turn a little bit before I go to the questions, which I'm going to do in just a minute. We've got a couple of interesting ones. I'm interested in all of your thoughts about what the implications of this, what you've achieved together really is for infrastructure in New York. We're kind of in a moment where we've got some funding to do some long neglected projects, some of which we've already talked about and are underway. But I'm just curious from all of your point of view, whether you think there are lessons learned for what we should be thinking about in terms of the experience of these new infrastructure projects, as well as, I think, the fundamental assumptions behind them. So I love to hear from all four of you about that, but whoever would like to start.
I could certainly say I think it is a really interesting model from the perspective of integrating art and artists and what they're able to bring to what I see as in a sense, transformation of an infrastructure facility into a civic space. And I think that's, at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. Whether you talk about it in terms of, customer satisfaction and engagement, it's the sense of belonging and excitement to be in a place, and a sense of identifying with what you perceive as its reflection of your culture and society, or if you're visiting it, how you can experience that in a really rich way. If we go to Sabine Hornig's work, for example, which is, really extraordinary. I mean, it's almost like a stained glass window, but it incorporates a kind of recomposed, reconfigured landscape view from Queens to New York City, integrated with quotes from Fiorello LaGuardia. Now, many people probably coming to LaGuardia Airport don't even know that LaGuardia was a person, or who they were, or what they were. And we could have a bronze statue of LaGuardia outside, but who would pay attention or care about that? And this actually brings, through this artist's vision, we didn't say you need to bring LaGuardia's ideas into the mix here, but now suddenly this historical figure is brought to life through his words and ideas that still resonate today. Or Laura Owens with her mural that's, icons of New York City. If we can go to see, Laura's piece, it's so joyful, and it's such an incredible way to evoke the spirit of New York, including some of its iconic features, but without them being cliched kind of marketing exercises, and to also include really meaningful things, like Laura chose to include an Indigenous land acknowledgement in her work. So I think, these are all the ways artists they really can transform a space and add layers of meaning to it, I think in a really profound way.
Thank you, Nicholas. Other observations about infrastructure in New York?
I was going to talk more of the nuts and bolts of the design. So I would just go back to maybe this image. So, you know, New Yorkers are all aware of the Superstorm Sandy and the blackouts and all of those things. And so what we've done as part of this, in terms of making the building vertical, we've taken all of our critical infrastructure and we've raised it up on the level second floor. So all your substations, your generators, your mechanical units, everything is up above. In addition to that, we've completely dry flood proofed the entire building. So you have that. We complied with the Port Authority's resiliency requirements, the code plus their resiliency requirements. The 100-year storm is not the 100-year storm anymore. We're seeing them more and more. So we're covered for that. I wanted to go back to the hold room because this is a credit to Derek and Stewart. In terms of infrastructure and providing customer experience and amenities, I point to the hold room because we put power in for all the seats. Everybody has a phone, everybody's powering up. But what LGP recognizes, we don't want to have another blackout. So they put basically half of the terminal on emergency backup power. So that in a blackout, Terminal B can still function, which is a credit to LGP. I don't know if you want to touch on that, Jared, but
yeah, it's a good point. And it's not specific to ART, but certainly resiliency and redundancy is at the forefront of our minds when we plan these things. And we think about things like power outages and making sure the facility can still operate, or weather events, making sure we can manage passengers and aircraft. Speaking to the question just about ART and infrastructure, I think LaGuardia has maybe opened some doors, certainly with the Port Authority. They've embraced it at some of their other facilities. I think Moynihan was mentioned, but we're working on the JFK Terminal 6, and it's a requirement now. We're working with the port, and we will work with the port and others on ART installations there. They've had calls with us about Newark and other stations, so it's become somewhat of a mandate for them too going forward.
Thank you. You anticipated, Derek and Paul, one of the questions that had come in the chat about climate resilience. So thank you for doing that. I'm going to turn to a couple of other questions. One of the questions is about how the pandemic affected both the construction of the facility, if it had any impact, and also whether there were decisions about interior design that were affected by the pandemic.
I'm happy to start. I think, from a traffic and a flow perspective, of course, aviation was hit extremely hard. And so we had far less volume for the period of the pandemic. And while in some ways that allowed construction to advance a little easier, I would say it was probably offset by the challenges of the pandemic in terms of supply chains and fabrication shops being shut down and all things of that nature. In fact, we concluded the arrivals and departures hall in June of 2020, just a few months after the pandemic began. And so we were confronted with finishing the ART, with fabrication shops that were shut and having to get them reopened, get essential work orders. Some of the artists had to review their art and the installation remotely because they were in Europe. They couldn't travel at all. In fact, some of our team had to work with remote security experts to commission some of the security equipment and do that over Zoom, which was so there was a lot of unique challenges associated with the pandemic and the inability to get experts to come and work on the site who were planning to. That was probably more of a challenge than any drop off in traffic created any kind of an opportunity. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, absolutely. And I also was curious whether this was asked by one of our audience members, and I'm curious what the answer is. What's your favorite feature? Now, I know you have to love it all, but I'm curious whether there's something that you're particularly proud of or particularly love. And that's a question, obviously, for all of you.
That's trying to pick a favorite child. I'll let Paul and Derek go first.
Go ahead, Paul.
I still think I mentioned the pedestrian bridge, right? I love that space. You're up 60 feet, as I mentioned, watching the aircraft taxi underneath you. What you can't see here because we're looking east, but from the other side, you get the Manhattan skyline. So it has the panoramic views. It has the aircraft operations below. You have a sense of direction because you can see the gates and where your aircraft are, and there's amenities on it. So it's not just a bridge. There's a diner right in the right side of the screen. So for me, it has a little bit of everything. That would be my favorite place.
Great, thanks, Paul.
I'm going
Derek,
to cheat a little
Nicholas?
bit. Oh, go ahead. You want to go, Nicholas?
No,
I'll-
Derek, either one of you, whichever next.
All right. Well, as an engineer, I'd side with Paul on the bridges. They're just an engineering marvel. They were really hard to build. Hats off to the team and our contractors. And it really is an amazing space to stand in there. From an amenities standpoint, I do like Yeppa's balloons. I think they're very whimsical and they kind of add delight all throughout the building. And it's just a great talking point. But I also really enjoy the water feature. It's entertaining. The content is fantastic. That we worked with a lot of local companies on that. Iconic New York and arts and entertainment and things to do in New York, and it just you can just tell the public really enjoys the space.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think just, the art, the special features, the gardens, the water feature. I mean, these are things you don't find in the airport typically, and they all enrich the space so much. And I think we know we've really kind of hit a winner when we see flight crews taking selfies and photos and filming feature aspects of the terminal, because we know they see the world. And when something stands out to them at an airport, you've kind of hit the ball out of the park and made a real difference.
Thank you.
And I guess I maybe the thing I would say that that thrills me is that if you were a fan of Sarah Z's work or Laura Owen's work, or knew any of these artists, and you wanted to understand their work, you wanted to see the greatest examples of their work, you wouldn't be going to museums necessarily. You would be going to LaGuardia Terminal B.
That's a mic drop right there, Nicholas.
Yeah, that's amazing. I confess that I used to go to the airport as a child with my parents, probably Marine Terminal at the time, to watch planes go take off. But in all my adult life, I can't imagine going to an airport for just an experience. But this one I think is different, and the art certainly is a major feature of that, but also the light that you've included is really super important, I think. So we have during as Stewart said, in June, when the head house opened, the New York Times did a fantastic story. And of course, if you remember, everything was closed. All the museums were closed. All the galleries were closed. And the headline was, if you're missing culture and you want to see some art, you can go to LaGuardia Airport.
Yeah, that's right. And people did.
No, absolutely. So someone has asked a question about how much flexibility as designers you have within the regulatory and the standards set by FAA to make design choices in many of the features of the airport. They're calling out wayfinding and seating layouts, et cetera. I was just curious whether you have thoughts about that.
Completely compliant. To the Port Authority's credit and the FAA, we had to comply with all of their guidelines. FAA has strict standards that we complied with. Part 77, if you look at the line of sight from the air traffic control tower, the shape of the rooftop of the concourses all respect the restricted service road from the air traffic control tower. We were able to build this, by the way, in very, very close proximity to that existing air traffic control tower. But in terms of design inside, We worked with all of the Port Authority's design guidelines. They put together requirements for work and provisions. We followed the standards for throughput, widths, space, hold room sizes, all of that. And we went even further. So if you look at the hold room, the typical hold room is set up to hold, sorry, I think it's in here somewhere. It's set up to hold the aircraft at the gate plus a 2-hour delay, plus amenities. So we've really considered everything in terms of the guidelines in our design. We didn't vary in terms of coming up with our own guidelines. It's more the sculptural nature and the actual design that we did that with.
I just add meeting the regulatory standards or requirements is for us is a low bar. It's really going above that and making improvements.
Well, what a perfect note to end on, because indeed you have seemed to have knocked every aspect of this out of the park as a team, and also all of your individual expertise and how that's manifested in this place. So I just want to congratulate all of you again for both the MASterworks Award, but also just the achievements. It seems like it's been a marvelous collaboration that I think we all hope to see more of in New York infrastructure projects from soup to nuts in the future. So thank you very much for joining us today. I also want to thank the amazing MAS staff team for coordinating this event. And for the whole series, of course. And I want to thank all of our audience members for joining us today. We've had a couple of special guests in our audience today. Several board members are here with us today. Susan Friedman, who many of you may also know runs the Public Art Fund, but Lisa Smith-Cashin is with us, and also Janet Ross. So thank you especially for joining us. If you are not already a member of MAS and enjoyed today's program, we hope that you'll join and become a member of the organization to support both our advocacy work and our ongoing programming. We have some fun programming coming up as we close out the year, and I just wanted to share that on December the 7th. We'll have our next session on comprehensive planning as a land use framework and how it intersects with historic preservation. AICP credits will be available that day, and our team has shared a link. So let me close again by congratulating the incredible team for LaGuardia Terminal B, and we are very excited to enjoy the space you've created for all of us, and congratulate you and look forward to seeing the great work that you'll do together in other places in New York in the future. So thank you again.